The billionaire thought he was buying entertainment. He had no idea he was about to get schooled. I said, play something. Marcus Webb's fist slammed against the marble table, crystal glasses jumping like startled birds. Every conversation in the five-star restaurant died. The waitress he'd cornered, Maya, her name tag reading like an accusation, stood frozen beside the concert grand piano. Webb's friends laughed. Cruel, sharp sounds that cut through designer silence. "Come on, Marcus," one called out. "Make her dance, too." Maya's hands trembled as she approached the bench. But wait, why were her fingers moving like that? Like they already knew these keys? The Steinway waited. $97,000 of German precision, about to become a weapon neither Webb nor his audience could imagine. Maya sat down, adjusted the bench with the kind of precision that should have been their first warning. The silence before the storm was about to shatter everything they thought they knew. 3 hours earlier, Maya had been invisible. That's how she preferred it at Lumiere, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent. She moved through the dining room like a ghost in black slacks and white shirt, refilling water glasses for people who'd never worked a day in their lives. Maya had perfected the art of being seen, but not noticed. Smile politely. Make no sudden movements. Don't let them catch you listening when they discuss their third homes or their children's trust funds. But Maya always listened. Not to their money talk, to the background music floating from the restaurant's concert grand. Tonight, it was Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. The hired pianist was competent but soulless, hitting every note while missing every emotion. Maya's fingers twitched involuntarily against her serving tray. She knew that piece. Had performed it at Carnegie Hall during her Juilliard senior recital, back when her biggest worry was whether her parents could afford the plane ticket from California to hear her play. That was 18 months ago, before the student loans came due, before her classical performance degree proved as worthless as everyone had warned, before reality forced her to trade Rachmaninoff for rent money. "Miss! Miss!" A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Maya turned to see a woman in diamonds waving an empty champagne flute like a weapon. "We've been waiting forever for refills." "Of course. My apologies." Maya's training kicked in. The conservatory had taught her more than music. It had taught her how to perform under pressure, how to maintain composure when everything was falling apart. Skills that proved surprisingly useful in the service industry. She glided toward the wine station, past tables of tech moguls and real estate titans, past conversations about market volatility and yacht maintenance. The pianist transitioned to Debussy, but he was rushing the tempo, missing the subtle poetry that made Clair de Lune breathe. Maya bit her tongue. In her old life, she would have gently corrected him. In this life, she bit her tongue and poured champagne. "Maya!" Sergio, the floor manager, appeared at her elbow. "Table 12 needs attention. The Webb party." His voice carried a warning she'd learned to recognize. Difficult customer. Handle with care. Don't make waves. Maya looked across the dining room to table 12. Marcus Webb sat at the center like a king holding court, surrounded by 5 other men in expensive suits. Webb's laugh was too loud, his gestures too broad, his voice carrying across the restaurant like he owned not just his table, but the entire space. New money, Maya diagnosed. The kind that screamed its presence because it was still insecure about belonging. She'd served his type before. Tech billionaires who'd struck it rich young and never learned manners. They treated restaurants like their personal playgrounds and staff like entertainment. Webb was worse than most. She'd watched him send back 3 courses just to watch the chef scramble, had seen him make the sommelier recite the wine list twice before ordering the most expensive bottle to teach him respect. Maya approached table 12 with practiced caution. Webb was in the middle of a story, gesturing wildly with a fork loaded with Wagyu beef. "So I told the board, either you take my offer or I build my own company and destroy you." 3 weeks later, they called me back, begging. His friends laughed on cue, the kind of forced appreciation that money buys but never earns. "Gentlemen," Maya said softly, stopping at Webb's shoulder, "how are we enjoying everything this evening?" Webb barely glanced at her. "Wine's getting warm. Fix it." He didn't say please, didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge she was human. Maya reached for the bottle in the ice bucket, checking the temperature. Still perfectly chilled, but she'd learned not to argue with men like Webb. She adjusted the ice anyway, buying herself time to escape. But as she worked, the background music shifted. The pianist began Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata and immediately botched the opening. Maya's hand froze on the wine bottle. He was playing it like a march instead of a meditation, destroying one of the most delicate pieces ever written. Her reaction was almost imperceptible. A slight tightening around her eyes, a barely audible intake of breath. But Webb caught it. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" His voice carried a dangerous amusement. "You look like someone stepped on your cat." His friends turned their attention to Maya, predators sensing wounded prey. "No, sir, everything's fine." Maya's voice stayed level, professional. But her mistake was glancing toward the piano, toward the massacre happening in 3/4 time. Webb followed her gaze. His smile turned calculating. "Oh, you're a music lover. How cultured." The word dripped with sarcasm. "Tell me, what do you think of our entertainment tonight?" Maya felt the trap closing around her. Every instinct screamed at her to deflect, to escape, to maintain her invisibility. But the music god, the way he was butchering Beethoven, "He's very enthusiastic," she managed. Webb's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Enthusiastic! Did you hear that, boys? Our waitress here is a music critic." The table erupted in cruel laughter. Other diners began to notice the commotion, turning to watch the show. "I bet you know all about music," Webb continued, his voice rising. "What is it they say about people in your position? Failed dreams and all that?" Maya's composure cracked just slightly. Webb had found her pressure point and was pressing hard. "I should check on my other tables." "No, no, no." Webb's hand shot out, not quite touching her but blocking her escape. "You started this conversation. Finish it. What's wrong with the piano player?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Maya could feel every eye in the restaurant turning toward them. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. She had two choices: walk away and let him win, or step into the ring and fight back. But with what weapons? She was a waitress with student debt and a useless degree. He was a billionaire with an audience and nothing to lose. Maya took a breath, made her choice. "If you really want to know," she said quietly, "he's destroying everything beautiful about that piece." Webb's smile turned predatory. He'd found his entertainment for the evening. The silence at table 12 stretched like a held breath. Webb leaned back in his chair, studying Maya with the focused attention of a cat watching a mouse. His friends sensed blood in the water and moved closer, forming a circle of expensive suits and cruel anticipation. "Destroying it, you say?" Webb's voice carried across the restaurant. Other conversations died as diners turned to watch the show. That's a strong word from someone who serves soup for a living. The insult landed exactly as intended. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but years of classical training had taught her something Webb couldn't buy: discipline under pressure. "I apologize if I overstepped," she began. "Oh, you did." Webb cut her off, savoring every syllable. "But now I'm curious. Since you're such an expert, why don't you tell us what he should be playing?" His friends chuckled, cruel sounds that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Maya glanced around the room. 30 tables of New York's elite, all watching her humiliation unfold like dinner theater. The pianist had moved on to some generic background music, but the damage was done. Webb had her cornered, and they both knew it. "I'm sure you're very busy people," Maya tried again. "Not too busy for education," Webb interrupted. "See, boys, this is what's wrong with America. Everyone thinks they're entitled to opinions about things they don't understand." He gestured broadly, playing to his audience. "Our server here probably took one music appreciation class at community college and thinks she knows better than a professional pianist." Maya's jaw tightened. Community college. The assumption cut deeper than he knew, but not for the reasons he imagined. She thought of her acceptance letter to Juilliard, the full scholarship that had made her parents cry with pride. She thought of her senior recital, the standing ovation from professors who'd seen true talent. She thought of everything she'd lost when the real world came calling. "Actually," she said quietly, Let me guess," Webb wrote over her words. "You wanted to be a professional musician but couldn't cut it, so now you're bitter about everyone who actually made it." His voice carried perfect cruelty, each word calculated to inflict maximum damage. "That's why you're working here instead of Carnegie Hall, right, sweetheart?" The mention of Carnegie Hall hit like a physical blow. Maya had performed there, had felt that legendary acoustics wrap around her Rachmaninoff like a living thing, had stood on that stage and known for 18 perfect minutes that she was exactly where she belonged. But Webb couldn't know that. To him, she was just another failed dreamer serving drinks to her betters. Just another cautionary tale about reaching too high. "I think," Webb continued, warming to his theme, "our little music critic needs to learn some humility. What do you think, boys? Should we give her a chance to put her money where her mouth is?" The table erupted in agreement, voices overlapping in cruel harmony. "Marcus, you're terrible," one of his friends laughed. "But I love where this is going." "Make her sing," another called out. "Karaoke night." "No, no, no." Webb held up a hand, his eyes glittering with malicious inspiration. "Something better. Much better." He stood slowly, commanding the attention of the entire restaurant. Conversations died table by table as diners turned to watch the spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb announced, his voice carrying to every corner of Lumiere, "we have a treat tonight. Our server here is apparently a musical expert who thinks our pianist isn't up to her standards." Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Some diners looked uncomfortable, but no one moved to stop what was happening. Maya felt the walls closing in. Every face in the restaurant was turned toward her, waiting for the show to begin. She thought about walking away, about maintaining her dignity and her job. But Webb's words echoed in her head. Couldn't cut it. Community college. Failed dreamer. Each assumption was wrong. Each insult missed its mark. But together, they formed a picture she recognized, the way the world saw her now. A waitress with delusions. A nobody with opinions above her station. "So here's what we're going to do," Webb continued, his voice rising with theatrical flair. "Since our critic here knows so much about music, she's going to demonstrate proper technique. Right here, right now, on our beautiful Steinway." He gestured toward the concert grand like a game show host revealing the grand prize. The pianist, confused and defensive, stopped playing. The restaurant fell silent except for the soft clink of silverware and the whisper of expensive fabric as every head turned toward table 12. Maya stood frozen, caught between dignity and desperation, between truth and survival. Webb's trap was perfect refuse and prove she was all talk, accept and risk exposure that could change everything. But as she looked at that piano, something stirred in her chest. Something that had been sleeping for 18 months, buried under rejection letters and financial reality. Something that remembered the weight of keys under her fingers and the magic of making music breathe. Webb was still talking, still performing for his audience, But Maya was no longer listening. She was looking at the Steinway, at $97,000 of precision and possibility. And for the first time since arriving in New York, she was remembering who she used to be, who she still was, underneath the uniform and the student debt and the careful invisibility. The question was she brave enough to let them see? Maya's silence stretched for exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds that felt like 7 years, 7 lifetimes, 7 chances to choose a different path. But Webb wasn't patient enough for introspection. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" His voice dripped mock concern. "Stage fright? Or are you finally realizing you're in over your head?" The restaurant held its collective breath. 30 tables of Manhattan's elite watching a working-class woman get put in her place. Maya looked at the piano again. The Steinway Model D, she recognized now. Concert Grand. The same model she'd trained on at Juilliard, the same instrument that had carried her through Chopin and Rachmaninoff and Bach. Her fingers tingled with muscle memory, 18 months of suppressed instinct suddenly flooding back. "I don't usually," she began. "Of course you don't usually," Webb interrupted, his friends laughing on cue. "Usually you just serve drinks and keep your opinions to yourself. But tonight's different, isn't it?" He stepped closer, invading her space with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. Maya felt something shift inside her chest. A door she'd kept locked for 18 months, sealed shut with rejection letters and unpaid bills, began to creak open. She thought of her parents, immigrants who'd worked double shifts to pay for her lessons. She thought of her teacher, Professor Martinez, who'd believed in her talent even when she'd stopped believing in herself. "Fine," she said quietly. Webb blinked. He'd expected her to run, to crumble, to prove his point about people knowing their place. Instead, Maya straightened her shoulders and took a step toward the piano. "Excuse me?" Webb's voice cracked slightly. "I said fine." Maya's voice was steady now, controlled. "You want a demonstration? You'll get one." The restaurant fell silent except for the soft whisper of her footsteps on marble as she walked toward the stage. Webb recovered quickly, his showman instincts kicking in. "Well, well, our little critic has some backbone after all." He turned to play to his audience, arms spread wide. "Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for what I'm sure will be a memorable performance." Cruel laughter rippled through the room, but Maya was no longer listening. She was approaching the piano like she was greeting an old friend, her trained eye automatically assessing its condition. The bench height was wrong for her. The lid was only half open, dampening the acoustic potential. The hired pianist had left sheet music scattered across the stand generic arrangements that wouldn't challenge a first-year student. Maya swept the music aside with one efficient motion. She didn't need sheet music, not for what she was about to do. She adjusted the bench with the precise movements of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, rotating the seat exactly 2 notches counterclockwise. "Oh, very professional," Webb called out, milking every moment. "Look at her, boys, she's got the whole ritual down pat. Wonder where she learned that? YouTube University?" His friends howled with laughter, but their amusement had an edge now. Something about Maya's quiet confidence was making them nervous. She tested the pedals with her foot, soft, sostenuto, sustain. All responsive, all perfectly maintained. The Steinway was in concert condition, tuned to perfection, waiting for someone who knew how to unleash its potential. Maya's hands hovered over the keys for just a moment, and in that moment she made her choice. Not just about what to play, but about who to be. Not the invisible waitress with student debt and a worthless degree. Not the failed dreamer serving soup to her betters. But Maya, Juilliard graduate, Carnegie Hall performer, who'd once made a room full of classical music professors weep with a single phrase from Rachmaninoff. "What's she waiting for?" someone whispered. "Probably trying to remember chopsticks," Webb answered, but his voice had lost some of its swagger. Something about the way Maya sat at that bench, the perfect posture, the professional hand position, was setting off alarm bells. Maya closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way Professor Martinez had taught her. Find the music inside yourself first. Let it build until it has nowhere to go but out through your fingers. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer Maya the waitress. She was Maya the pianist. And she was about to remind everyone in this room what real music sounded like. Her hands descended to the keys. The first notes that emerged from the Steinway weren't what anyone expected. Not chopsticks, not Mary Had a Little Lamb, not some fumbling attempt at pop music that would confirm every cruel assumption in the room. Instead, Maya's fingers found the opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor, arguably the most technically demanding piece in the classical repertoire. The restaurant fell silent. Not the polite quiet of background music, but the stunned silence of recognition. Even people who couldn't tell Mozart from McDonald's knew those opening chords. They'd heard them in movies, in commercials, in the cultural consciousness that separates music from mere noise. Webb's smile faltered. Just slightly, just for a moment, but Maya caught it. She was 3 measures in, and already his expression was shifting from smug anticipation to confused uncertainty. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Waitresses didn't play Rachmaninoff. Failed dreamers didn't command Steinways like they were born to it. "What is she?" one of Webb's friends whispered. "Shut up," Webb hissed, but his voice had lost its theatrical boom. His eyes were fixed on Maya's hands, watching technical precision that shouldn't exist in someone wearing a restaurant uniform. Maya continued the exposition, her fingers dancing across the keys with the fluid confidence of someone who'd performed this piece dozens of times. In recital halls, in competitions, in front of audiences who understood what they were witnessing. The muscle memory was perfect, 18 months of suppression melting away like snow in sunlight. Around the restaurant, conversations died table by table. Silverware stopped clinking. Even the kitchen staff began emerging from behind swinging doors, drawn by music that transformed the space from mere restaurant to concert hall. "This is impossible," Webb muttered, loud enough for his table to hear but quiet enough to avoid the growing audience. "She's a waitress. She serves drinks. His words trailed off as Maya transitioned into the piece's first major technical passage, her left hand providing thunderous bass support while her right hand spun delicate melodic lines 32 notes above. The hired pianist, forgotten in his corner, stopped pretending to pack up his music and simply stared. He recognized what he was hearing, not just technical competency, but artistry. The kind of musical interpretation that separated conservatory graduates from weekend hobbyists, professionals from pretenders. Webb's friend James, the one with actual musical training from his prep school days, leaned forward with growing alarm. "Marcus," he whispered urgently, "that's not easy music. That's—" "I know what it is," Webb snapped, but his voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. He was beginning to realize that his evening's entertainment had taken an unexpected turn, that the mouse he'd cornered might actually be a tiger. Maya reached the end of the exposition and paused, her hands lifting from the keys in the traditional silence before the orchestra would enter. But there was no orchestra tonight. Just her, the piano, and 30 tables of Manhattan's elite slowly realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. In that silence, Webb made his last desperate attempt to regain control. "Very nice," he called out, his voice too bright, too forced. "A bit ambitious for someone at your level, but very nice." He looked around for support from his audience, expecting them to join his mockery. Instead, he found faces full of concentration, confusion, and growing recognition. These were educated people, cultured people people who'd attended galas and fundraisers and knew the difference between amateur hour and the real thing. And what they were hearing was very, very real. "She's actually," James started to say. "She's actually nothing." Webb cut him off, but desperation was creeping into his voice. "It's a party trick. Anyone can memorize a few measures." But even as he spoke, Maya's hands returned to the keys, and what emerged next silenced every skeptic in the room. The development section of Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto is where pretenders reveal themselves. It's where technique meets artistry, where muscle memory must yield to musical intelligence. It's where Maya, Juilliard graduate and Carnegie Hall performer, reminded herself exactly who she was. Her left hand thundered through cascading octaves while her right hand sang the melody with the kind of nuanced phrasing that takes years to master. The restaurant's acoustics, designed for conversation, suddenly revealed their hidden potential as Maya's music filled every corner with crystalline clarity. Webb's table had gone completely silent. His friends, moments ago laughing at the waitress's presumption, now sat transfixed by musical mastery they couldn't deny. The cruel jokes died on their lips. The snide comments evaporated in the face of undeniable talent. "Oh my God," someone whispered from another table. "She's incredible." "Is that really Rachmaninoff?" another voice asked. "The full concerto," James answered quietly, his prep school musical education finally useful. "She's playing the full bloody concerto." His voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief that cut through Webb's remaining bluster like a blade. Maya was approaching the recapitulation now, the section where the opening themes return transformed by everything that came before. Her interpretation was mature, sophisticated, informed by years of study and performance that no amount of money could buy. And with every note, every phrase, every moment of musical perfection, Marcus Webb's carefully constructed evening of humiliation was crumbling around him. The predator was becoming the prey. The hunter was becoming the hunted. The status game was about to flip completely. What happened next would be talked about at Manhattan dinner parties for years to come. Maya's performance shifted into a realm that transcended mere technical proficiency. This was artistry unleashed, 18 months of suppressed passion flowing through her fingers like water through a broken dam. The Rachmaninoff wasn't just being played. It was being channeled, interpreted, transformed into something that made even the crystal chandeliers seem to hold their breath. Webb's face had gone pale. The confident smirk, the theatrical gestures, the casual cruelty, all of it evaporated as he watched a woman he'd dismissed as a failed dreamer command the piano like she was born to it. His friends sat frozen, their earlier laughter replaced by the uncomfortable realization that they were witnessing something far beyond their understanding. Maya reached the cadenza, the solo section where the pianist stands completely alone, unsupported by orchestra, naked before the audience with nothing but their skill and interpretation. It's the moment where pretenders are exposed and masters are revealed. Maya didn't just survive it, she soared. Her left hand provided a foundation of rolling arpeggios, while her right hand spun melodic lines that seemed to float above the rhythm like birds riding thermals. The technique was flawless, but more than that, it was musical. Every note served the larger phrase. Every phrase served the emotional arc. Every moment built toward something greater than the sum of its parts. "Jesus Christ," James whispered, his prep school composure finally cracking. "She's not just good. She's fucking brilliant." His profanity cut through the restaurant's refined atmosphere like a gunshot, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone was too transfixed by what they were hearing. The hired pianist had stopped even pretending to pack up. He stood against the wall, watching Maya with the mixture of awe and professional jealousy that only one musician can feel for another. He'd been playing piano for 20 years, had degrees and certifications and a steady gig at one of Manhattan's finest restaurants. But he'd never, not once, made music like this. Maya transitioned into the concerto's most technically demanding passage, her hands flying across the keyboard in patterns that seemed to defy physics. Octave runs, chromatic scales, thunderous chords that made the Steinway sing with power, all executed with the kind of precision that takes decades to develop. But it wasn't the technique that silenced the room. It was the music itself. The way Maya breathed life into Rachmaninoff's genius, the way she made every person in that restaurant feel something they couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. Webb tried one last desperate gambit. "Okay, okay," he called out, his voice cracking. "Very impressive. You've made your point. You can stop now." But his words were swallowed by the music, insignificant protests against an artistic force that wouldn't be contained. Maya didn't stop. She was approaching the climax of the concerto, the moment where all the themes converge in an explosion of musical and emotional power. Her entire body was engaged now, shoulders moving with the rhythm, head tilting with the melodic lines, every muscle serving the music's demands. Around the restaurant, people began standing, not in protest, not in confusion, but in recognition. Table by table, Manhattan's elite rose to their feet as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a performance that belonged in Carnegie Hall, not a restaurant. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Where did she train?" another voice asked. "That's conservatory-level playing," a woman murmured to her companion. "Maybe even beyond that." The whispers spread through the room like wildfire, each observation driving home the magnitude of Webb's miscalculation. Maya reached the final movement, her interpretation building toward a crescendo that seemed to lift the ceiling of the restaurant itself. The music poured from the Steinway in waves of sound that transformed the space, making everyone present feel like they were part of something larger than themselves. Webb's remaining composure shattered completely. He slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him as he watched his evening's entertainment become his public humiliation. His friends avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses, their phones, anything that wasn't the obvious reality of their complicity in what was supposed to be cruelty. The kitchen staff had fully emerged now, line cooks and dishwashers and prep chefs standing in doorways with expressions of wonder. They knew Maya as the quiet waitress who picked up extra shifts, who never complained, who treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. They'd never suspected she carried this inside her. Sergio, the floor manager, stood frozen near the wine station, his usual professional composure replaced by slack-jawed amazement. He'd hired Maya 18 months ago based on her references and work ethic. He'd never asked about her background, never wondered why someone with her intelligence was working for tips. Maya's performance built toward its inevitable climax, her hands moving with such speed and precision that they seemed to blur. The music filled every corner of the restaurant, spilled out onto the street, commanded attention from anyone within hearing. This was why she'd spent 10 years studying, why she'd practiced 8 hours a day through college, why she'd sacrificed social life and sleep and everything else for the chance to make music like this. Not for the money, not for fame, but for moments like this when the boundary between performer and music dissolved completely. The concerto's final measures approached like a storm breaking. Maya's left hand thundered through the bass register while her right hand sang the melody with crystalline clarity. Every technical element, dynamics, articulation, phrasing, rhythm came together in perfect synthesis. And then, in the space between one note and the next, something magical happened. The restaurant fell into complete, absolute silence. Not the nervous quiet of uncomfortable audience, but the reverent hush that follows truly transcendent art. Maya played the final chord, a massive resonant harmony that seemed to hang in the air long after her hands lifted from the keys. The Steinway's strings continued to vibrate, sending whispers of sound through the restaurant like echoes of something divine. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds. 5 seconds of absolute quiet as 30 tables of Manhattan's most sophisticated diners processed what they'd just experienced. Webb sat motionless, staring at Maya with an expression that cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been the first stirrings of shame. His evening's entertainment had become his education, and the lesson was more brutal than any humiliation he could have devised. Maya remained seated at the piano, her hands resting quietly in her lap, her breathing controlled despite the physical demands of the performance. She looked exactly like what she was, a world-class pianist who had just reminded everyone in the room, including herself, of her true worth. The silence held for exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds that contained multitudes, recognition, respect, the complete inversion of everything that had happened before. And then, like a dam breaking, the room erupted. The applause started with James. Webb's prep school friend, the one with actual musical training, began clapping with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who recognized artistry when he heard it. Within seconds, his applause was joined by another, then another, until the sound built into a thunderous ovation that shook the crystal chandeliers. Table by table, Manhattan's elite rose to their feet. Not politely, not reluctantly, but with the genuine enthusiasm reserved for truly exceptional performances. The woman in diamonds who'd demanded champagne refills was clapping with tears streaming down her cheeks. The tech moguls who'd been discussing market volatility were on their feet, their phones forgotten. Maya stood slowly, gracefully, and accepted the applause with the poise of someone who'd performed on the world's greatest stages. She nodded to the audience, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, not triumphant, not vindictive, but quietly satisfied. Webb remained seated, isolated in a sea of standing ovation, his face cycling through expressions like a broken slot machine. Confusion, embarrassment, the dawning realization that he'd just publicly humiliated himself in front of New York's most influential people. James was still clapping, his voice full of wonder. That was Carnegie Hall level. That was better than most professionals I've heard. He turned to Webb with an expression of accusation. Marcus, what the hell have you done? But Webb couldn't answer. His carefully constructed evening of entertainment had collapsed into his own public disgrace. Every cruel word he'd spoken, every assumption he'd made, every moment of calculated humiliation now hung in the air like accusations. The applause continued for a full minute and eternity in restaurant time. Maya accepted it with grace, bowing slightly to acknowledge the recognition. When the clapping finally began to fade, she remained standing beside the piano, no longer the invisible waitress, but unmistakably the artist she'd always been. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed restaurant, "thank you for listening." Her words were simple, dignified, free of any hint of the mockery she could have justifiably delivered. "Miss Maya," a voice called from across the room. An older woman at table 15, someone Maya recognized as a regular patron. "Where did you train?" The question hung in the air, and Maya knew that her answer would complete the evening's transformation. "Juilliard," she said simply. "Class of 2023. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of recognition and disbelief. "Juilliard," James repeated, the word carrying weight. He looked at Webb with undisguised disgust. "She's a fucking Juilliard graduate, Marcus. And you had her serving you drinks." Webb finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I had no idea." But his excuse sounded hollow even to himself. Ignorance wasn't a defense for cruelty, and everyone in the room knew it. "That's the problem," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Talent doesn't care about your bank account." The words hit like a physical blow, elegant in their simplicity and devastating in their accuracy. Around the restaurant, conversations began in whispers that gradually grew bolder. "Did you hear what he said to her? How embarrassing for him. She handled that with such class." The court of public opinion was rendering its verdict, and it wasn't favorable to Marcus Webb. The older woman from table 15 stood up, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Ms. Maya, I'm Margaret Sinclair from the Sinclair Foundation. We fund emerging artists." Maya recognized the name one of New York's most prestigious arts foundations. "I'd very much like to speak with you about performance opportunities," Mrs. Sinclair continued. "Real ones. The kind that belong on proper stages." Her words carried implied criticism of the evening's events that made Webb sink even lower in his chair. Maya nodded graciously. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Sinclair." But her response was professional, not desperate. She'd found her dignity again, and it armored her against both cruelty and false rescue. Webb made one last pathetic attempt to regain control. "Look, I think we're all getting a bit carried away here." But his words were drowned by a chorus of disapproval from his own table. "Shut up, Marcus," James said flatly. "You've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening." The rebuke from his own friend was the final nail in Webb's social coffin. Maya looked at Webb for a long moment, not with anger or triumph, but with something that might have been pity. "Everyone has value beyond what you see," she said quietly. Her second quote-worthy moment of the evening, delivered with the grace that money couldn't buy and power couldn't fake. Webb's response was barely audible. "I'm sorry." The words seemed to cost him physically. "I was wrong. About everything." It wasn't much of an apology, but it was the first genuine thing he'd said all evening. Maya nodded, accepting the apology without absolving the behavior. "Thank you for the opportunity to play," she said with quiet irony that made several diners smile. She was offering him a graceful exit from his humiliation, more kindness than he deserved. The restaurant's general manager appeared at Maya's side, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "Ms. Maya, please know that you have our full support. Your job is secure and—" He paused, seeming to realize the inadequacy of his words. "Actually," Mrs. Sinclair interjected, "I believe Ms. Maya may have better opportunities ahead of her." The implication was clear. This evening had changed everything for Maya, opened doors that had been closed by economic necessity. Maya smiled, the first truly radiant expression of the evening. Not because of the opportunity, but because she'd remembered who she was. The performance hadn't just revealed her talent to the audience, it had revealed it to herself. As the evening wound down, patrons approached Maya one by one. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers shared, opportunities discussed. The very people who'd watched her humiliation in silence were now competing to be associated with her talent. Webb remained at his table, abandoned by his friends, ignored by the staff, invisible in the way that Maya had been just hours before. The status game had flipped completely. The predator had become the outcast, the prey had become the prize. Maya collected her name tag, her server's book, the props of her disguise. But she moved differently now, with the confidence of someone who'd reclaimed their identity. Tomorrow, she might still be a waitress, but tonight, she was a pianist again. And that made all the difference. The last notes of conversation finally faded as Lumiere's patrons began their slow exodus into the Manhattan night. Maya stood by the piano, business cards fanned in her hand like a winning poker hand, each one representing a door that had been locked just hours before. Webb's table sat empty now, his friends having abandoned him one by one as they realized their association with the evening's cruelty would follow them to every dinner party for months to come. The billionaire himself had slipped out through the kitchen exit, avoiding the main dining room where his humiliation still hung in the air like expensive perfume. Sergio approached Maya with an expression she'd never seen before, respect mixed with something that might have been awe. Maya, we had no idea about your background, your training. He gestured helplessly at the piano, still trying to process what he'd witnessed. I never mentioned it, Maya replied simply. It didn't seem relevant to serving tables. But her voice carried no bitterness, just the calm acceptance of someone who'd made peace with her choices. The hired pianist, forgotten in all the evening's drama, packed up his generic sheet music with hands that shook slightly. He paused beside Maya, professional to professional. That was extraordinary, truly. I've never heard Rachmaninoff played with such... He searched for the right word. Heart, Maya suggested. Authority, he finished, and the word carried weight. He extended his hand and Maya shook it, one musician acknowledging another. Mrs. Sinclair waited patiently by the restaurant's entrance, her driver hovering nearby. When Maya approached, the elderly woman smiled with genuine warmth. My dear, I meant what I said about opportunities. The foundation has connections with Lincoln Center, Carnegie Hall. Her voice trailed off as she studied Maya's face. I'll call you, Maya promised, slipping the woman's card into her pocket with careful reverence. This wasn't just a business card. It was a lifeline back to the world she'd lost. As the restaurant emptied, Maya found herself alone with the Steinway one last time. She traced her fingers along its keys without pressing them, saying goodbye to a friend she might not see again for a while. Tomorrow would bring decisions, changes, the possibility of reclaiming her true identity. But tonight she'd remembered who she was. 6 months later, Maya walked onto the stage at David Geffen Hall, her burgundy concert gown catching the lights like liquid fire. The sold-out audience of Lincoln Center fell silent as she approached the Steinway Model D, the same model she'd commanded that night at Lumiere, but now in its proper setting. The program read Maya, From Service to Symphony, a concert series funded by the Sinclair Foundation for emerging artists who'd overcome extraordinary circumstances. Tonight's performance would be broadcast live, her Rachmaninoff interpretation reaching millions who'd never heard her story. In the front row sat Mrs. Sinclair, beaming with the pride of a mentor watching her protégé soar. Beside her, unexpectedly, sat Marcus Webb. He'd contacted Maya 3 months after that fateful evening, not with excuses or attempts at redemption, but with a simple request. Could he help? His offer had been characteristically grandiose: fund her entire career, set up a foundation in her name, buy her a concert hall. Maya had declined with the same grace she'd shown that night, but she'd accepted something smaller and more meaningful: his commitment to fund full scholarships for working-class music students at Juilliard. The Webb Scholarship Program now supported 12 students annually, each one chosen not for connections or privilege, but for talent and determination. Maya served on the selection committee, ensuring that other dreamers wouldn't have to choose between art and survival. As Maya settled at the piano, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The student loans were paid off. The Sinclair Foundation's first grant had taken care of that. Her parents sat in the third row, her mother clutching a program with Maya's photo on the cover, tears already streaming down her cheeks. The spotlight narrowed to encompass just Maya and the piano, the rest of the hall falling into dramatic darkness. She raised her hands to the keys, and in that moment of suspension, she felt the presence of everyone who'd believed in her talent when she'd stopped believing in herself. Professor Martinez, who'd called her the morning after videos of her Lumiere performance went viral. Sergio, who'd given her the time off she needed to audition and practice. Even the hired pianist from that night, who'd sent her a simple note, "Thank you for reminding us why we fell in love with music." Maya began with the same piece that had changed everything, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. But tonight, she wasn't playing alone. The New York Philharmonic surrounded her, dozens of world-class musicians ready to support her journey through one of classical music's greatest masterpieces. The opening measures filled the hall with the same power they'd commanded in that restaurant, but here they belonged. Here, they could breathe and soar and reach their full potential, unconfined by the limitations of cruelty or circumstance. As Maya played, she thought about the other servers still working in restaurants across the city, the other dreamers still choosing between passion and paycheck. Her story had become a beacon for them, proof that talent could triumph over circumstance, that dignity could overcome humiliation. The concerto built toward its climax, and Maya felt the familiar surge of joy that came from making music at the highest level. This was why she'd endured the rejection letters, the financial stress, the 18 months of invisible servitude. For moments like this, when music became transcendent. The final chord rang out across Lincoln Center, and for a heartbeat, the hall held its breath. Then came the applause, not the shocked recognition of that night at Lumiere, but the sustained appreciation of an audience that had come specifically to celebrate her artistry. As Maya stood to bow, she caught sight of Webb in the front row. He was clapping with genuine enthusiasm, his face showing none of the arrogance that had defined their first encounter. Their eyes met briefly, and he nodded a gesture of respect between equals, perhaps the first honest moment they'd ever shared. The standing ovation continued for 5 minutes, but Maya knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that excellence knows no boundaries. If you enjoyed Maya's incredible journey from invisible waitress to Lincoln Center star, you'll love Beat Stories, where extraordinary people reveal their hidden talents and change the world. Subscribe now for more inspiring tales of triumph over adversity, and discover the remarkable stories hiding in plain sight all around us. Sometimes the best lessons come from unexpected teachers. Music gave me my voice back, but it was the silence that taught me how to use it.